Chapter 6. Christmas Day was quiet for Erin and Al. As soon as they woke, they exchanged gifts. She felt uncomfortable giving him what she'd picked out, but she had nothing else to give. He opened her box and found a tie and a CD she'd burned of all her favorite songs. "I know it's lame, but I didn't know you at all, not even your size." He held up the tie, grinning happily. "I love Christmas ties." He put it on over his t-shirt, making her laugh. "And I can't wait to find out what your favorite songs are." "You can't wear a Santa Claus tie with a t-shirt. You need an ugly Christmas sweater." Al shook his head. "I don't want to get too fancy. You might not be able to keep your hands off me." "That would be rough for you, wouldn't it?" He laughed softly. "I'm not sure I could take it." "Better not try that then. I'm already looking at you lustfully with that tie on over your t-shirt. Might break me if it was over a Christmas sweater." "Well, since you're feeling so lustful toward me, you may touch me if you need to." He took her hand and placed it on his chest. "Go ahead." Erin laughed. "No, it's time for me to open my present." He deposited a wrapped gift in her lap. "Go for it." Feeling funny opening it under his watchful eye, she carefully tore the paper and opened a big box, which revealed 2 small jewelry boxes. "Jewelry? I barely know you." He chuckled. "Maybe so, but you're my wife, and jewelry seems appropriate." Erin felt her heart pounding as she opened the larger box first, guessing correctly it was a necklace. She pulled the pendant toward her and smiled. "It's a heart." He nodded. "Symbolic of giving you mine. I was hoping I'd marry someone I could give my heart to." "What if you hadn't?" He grinned. "I have a book as a booby prize if I didn't like my wife." "You do not." Al laughed as he stood up to go to the bedroom, coming back a moment later with another wrapped gift. "Are you sure?" She took it from him, tearing off the paper, and revealing a book called Making Your Marriage Work. "I guess I'm flattered not to be given this." "How awful." "Open the other one," he urged as he sat back down beside her. "The stones in this are kind of an odd color." "What are they?" she asked. They were a light brown, and she wasn't certain she'd ever seen a stone of that particular shade. He smiled. "I thought chocolate diamonds would be appropriate." She shook her head. "And you didn't even know me then?" She fingered the other box, very nervous that it might contain a ring, and she wasn't ready for a ring from him, which made no sense at all, because they were already married. She didn't know why it bothered her, but it did. He grinned. "Well, I knew a chocolate diamond from a chocolatier would be appropriate for any woman. I wish you'd just brought me some more fudge. I didn't know if it would be okay to bring it overseas, and I didn't think you'd want me to just give you chocolate for every gift for the rest of your life. I do have better manners than that." He watched her. "Aren't you going to open the other box?" "I got you a tie. I didn't know what else to get you, and now it feels very lame in comparison." He slipped his arm around her, pulling her closer to him. "It's about the thought that went into a gift. You knew nothing about me. And I will wear that Santa tie. Probably on the 4th of July to drive the people around me crazy, but I'll wear it." She smiled, still turning the jewelry box in her hands over and over. "Thanks for being so sweet about it. I think you'll find me to be the sweetest, most wonderful man in the whole wide world, as long as you don't have anyone to compare me to." He kissed her cheek. "Open the other box." She opened the small box and was relieved to see a pair of earrings to match the necklace. "They're beautiful." Each earring was 2 interwoven hearts with tiny chocolate diamonds in it. "Thank you." She turned to him and wrapped her arms around him. "Both gifts are perfect. Why weren't you already married?" He chuckled. "It's hard to meet women when the only time you stay out late is so you can experiment with a new batch of fudge. Sometimes, You just have no time to meet new people. I was dating a girl when I graduated from college, but when she found out I was going to have Misty living with me, she told me to forget it. That's really sad. Erin sighed. Why can't people be kind? No idea. He stroked her cheek. I'm a mostly happy man. I mean, I was sad about her breaking up with me for a little while, but I got over it. I made my own little chocolate empire. And I'm now your chocolate empress. He laughed softly. Of course you are. I can't think of a more fitting empress for a chocolate empire either. Erin turned to face him fully on the couch. My gifts were wonderful. Thank you for them. Al smiled. Just so you like them and will wear them. Any woman would wear chocolate diamonds given to her by her own personal chocolate maker. She leaned forward, brushing her lips against his. He pulled her closer until she was completely pressed up against him, deepening the kiss. I think you're pretty incredible, Erin, whatever last name you choose to use. She laughed, burying her face in his throat. You're a pretty great guy. I'm not sure I deserve you. Well, you don't deserve me if you're not going to feed me breakfast. She sighed. Am I always going to be in charge of breakfast? She asked, trying to make it sound like she didn't want to be. As soon as they were home, she'd buy a couple of boxes of cereal and call them set if that was the case. For this week, yes. I'll handle suppers. All right. French toast? She got to her feet and headed toward the kitchen. Sounds delicious. He loved to watch her in the kitchen. She wasn't nearly as confident there as he was, and it was fun to watch her fiddle around, trying to get the right thing and measuring everything exactly. He had been one to add a little of this and a pinch of that for years. Recipes were never followed. Watching her, it seemed as though she had memorized an exact recipe for making French toast, and she was following it. She put sausage and the French toast on the table a few minutes later. Are you a coffee drinker? I should have asked. He shook his head. I'm more of a juice or milk with breakfast kind of person. Me too. Good. I won't make coffee. She put both milk and juice on the table and a couple of glasses for each of them. There. Am I forgetting anything? He shook his head. Looks good to me. After breakfast, he got out a big map of Switzerland he'd apparently brought with him. You're not going to use GPS to get places? She asked, surprised. Mostly, I am. I'm just trying to get an idea which directions I'll go and what kind of terrain we'll be driving through. What exactly are we doing this week? She asked. He still hadn't told her. I want to tour different chocolate factories here. We'll taste their chocolate and see exactly how they do things. Erin got really excited for a moment until the truth of the situation hit her. You're using our honeymoon for a tax write-off? But you'll get free chocolate samples. I approve of free chocolate, but Al, how tacky. Sorry. What if you'd married a woman who didn't like chocolate? There are a few crazy people like that out there. Al shook his head. Not loving chocolate is like not observing Taco Tuesday as the national weekly holiday that it is. Erin's eyes widened. Today's Tuesday. Did we buy the stuff for tacos? I was kind of surprised they had tortillas at the grocery store we stopped in, but if you're up for tacos made from corn tortillas, I've got you covered. Sounds good to me. As long as I don't have to miss out on Taco Tuesday. It hadn't occurred to me it would be harder to observe here in Switzerland. They changed and went out onto the porch to make use of the hot tub there. Erin was slightly nervous about being in a bathing suit in front of him, but he was her husband after all. If he didn't like the way she looked in a suit, he was welcome to run away screaming, but he couldn't expect her to put out after that either. Once in the tub, she sighed, sinking deep into the water. This feels good. The view isn't bad either. Erin agreed, but when she glanced over at him, he wasn't looking at the mountains as she was. His eyes were locked on her. She had a hard time knowing what to say to that, wondering what they should do for the rest of the day. She was always so busy at home, and when she wasn't, she was reading. It was strange having real free time with nothing to fill it. He scooted closer to her on the bench in the hot tub, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "What do you think of Switzerland so far?" "It's gorgeous. I'm used to mountains, so I didn't think I'd love it quite as much as I do. I could just stare at that scenery all day, every day. Each mountain range has a different feel to it." "Have you ever been to the Ozarks?" "I'm not even sure how they can call them mountains, but they do." "Yeah, they seem more like hills than mountains," she agreed. "I think these are my favorite mountains I've been in." "Then I picked a good place?" "Well, sure. You're writing it off, aren't you?" Al sighed. "Does that bother you?" "Not since I'm getting chocolate out of it. If you'd been a banker and came here to tour banks, I'd probably get bored, but chocolate? Who can say no to free chocolate?" She turned to him, stroking her hand over his cheek. He had a very short beard, and she was still trying to decide if she liked it. She'd never dated a man with a beard. His eyes were on hers as he leaned down and kissed her softly, tentatively. When she opened her mouth, he deepened the kiss, pulling her onto his lap, his hands stroking over her back and shoulders. Her swimsuit was a one-piece, so she was mostly covered, but it left little to the imagination. When his hand strayed around to cup her breast, she pulled away for a moment, startled. His eyes remained on hers. "Okay?" Erin nodded, leaning back into him for another kiss. They were married. He was kind and loving, and she wanted children. It was okay. It wasn't long before the hot from the water didn't compare to the hot from within her. She climbed off his lap and stood up, offering her hand to him. "I think we'd be more comfortable doing this in bed, wouldn't we?" He wasn't going to argue. He dried off as quickly as he could, grabbed her offered hand, and dragged her toward the bedroom. Erin choked back a laugh at how eager he obviously was to drag her to bed. Life with Al would never be even a little bit dull. Asterisk asterisk. An hour later, Erin was lying in Al's arms, her head pillowed on his chest. She couldn't seem to keep her hand still. It was constantly stroking his shoulder or his chest. Al smiled, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "Thank you." She laughed softly. "We are married, you know." "I know. I didn't expect that to happen quite so soon, though. I told you I just needed a little time to get to know you better. I feel like I've had that." And she was ready for children. Since her sister had become pregnant, having a baby was all she'd been able to think about. "I guess I just expected that to mean a month or two, not that I'm complaining, of course." She laughed. "Well, we can wait another month or two if it's that important to you." He growled, rolling over quickly and pinning her to the mattress. "I'm not sure that's an option at this point." He pressed his lips to hers, his hands going to her sides, to tickle her lightly. "No tickling," she said as she giggled hysterically. "That's not fair. All's fair. In love and war. This is tickling. Nothing's fair in tickling." She pushed him away and quickly rolled to the edge of the bed. "Now I'm hungry." He groaned, putting his arm over his eyes. "From what I've seen, you're always hungry." "Pretty much. I'm going to go get a snack. Do you want anything?" Al shook his head, watching her go. She'd pulled the cover from the bed and wrapped it around herself toga style as she left the room. He couldn't help but grin. He had an awfully special woman for a wife. Dr. Lachele had outdone herself, and he couldn't wait to tell her so. In fact, 5 minutes later, he read over the quick email he'd typed and pressed send. That crazy purple-haired whirlwind had done something he'd never thought possible. She'd found him a woman that he could very easily fall in love with. He was thrilled with the match and wanted to shout it from the rooftops. He wasn't sure what it was about Erin that appealed to him so much. She had a very sharp tongue. She had no ability to keep her opinions on anything to herself. She wasn't terribly competent in the kitchen. But she was sweet. He'd seen the way she'd looked at children in the airport, and he knew she wanted her own. And she was beautiful. He'd never seen a woman that was quite as perfect for him as Erin was. He was going to keep her. He just hoped she realized that he was perfect for her as well. If not, he'd have to keep working on her until she did. Chapter 7. By the time they were home from Switzerland, Erin was already half in love with Al. They had one day after they arrived home, before they both had to head back to work, and they were exhausted from jet lag. They had decided to live in the house he currently owned, the house he and Misty had grown up in. Within a few minutes of arriving home, the work calls started to come in for him, and he disappeared before her eyes. He changed from her lovable husband Al into a businessman. He closed himself off in his office, and Erin watched him go, wondering when he'd be back out to talk to her. They'd planned to grocery shop together, but he seemed to no longer be interested in doing anything that was not work-related. She shrugged and picked up her phone, calling her mom. "We're home, safe and sound. You can stop worrying now." Mom sighed. "If your baby girl was off in another country with a total stranger she'd married, you'd worry too. But I'm not anymore. The worry has passed." Erin looked at the closed door of the room Al had closed himself off in. "He's really a good man. How was Switzerland? Did you ski?" "We actually toured chocolate factories. My honeymoon was a tax write-off. I'm still trying to decide how offended I should be about that." Her mother laughed. "At least he won't be off spending your money on silly things if he's using his honeymoon for a tax write-off." There was a moment of silence. "Your dad says to tell you he's glad you're not dead. He should write greeting cards." Erin jumped, startled at a knock at the front door. "I'll call you back." Someone's at the door. She opened it wide to find a man, not much older than her, standing at the door with a big yellow lab. "See? I told Al I could keep him alive while you were living it up in Switzerland." The man walked into the house as if he owned the place. "I'm Erin." She stared at the man, hoping he'd introduce himself before she felt the need to call 911. "Oh, man. I forgot we hadn't met yet. I'm Dale, the manager of Frank's Fudge. I've seen pics of you and emailed back and forth with Al about you so much in the past week, it felt like we'd met." "Oh, he's mentioned you. It's good to meet you." She'd noticed Al spent more time on his phone than she would have liked while they were gone, but she had no idea he was messaging with his manager. "Who's your friend?" she asked, doing all she could to resist petting the beautiful dog. "This is Bo. He's Al's dog." Al didn't mention him? As soon as Erin realized the beautiful animal was hers by way of marriage, she was on her knees. She buried her face in his neck, tears coming to her eyes. Her mother had been allergic to dogs, so she'd never had one growing up. As an adult, she'd always lived in apartments that didn't allow animals. "You're the prettiest baby ever to live." "Yes, you are." Dale laughed down at her. "I can see you two are going to get along just fine." "Where's Al?" "Office," Erin answered, wondering if the man knew where it was. With the way he'd walked into the house like he owned it, she assumed he knew. "I'm going to talk to him for a minute. Enjoy, Bo." As he walked off, Erin stayed on the floor, getting licked within an inch of her life. He trotted off after a moment and brought her a squirrel dog toy, missing his squeaker and one eye. It was obviously a much-loved object. She threw it, watching as it flew through the air, and Bo brought it back to her. It was almost worth marrying Elle just to get you. Yes, it was. She knew she was talking baby talk, and she wasn't sure why, but it felt right. She took Beau to the backyard, and the two of them played. She suddenly had all the energy she'd been lacking since they arrived home. It was almost an hour later when Elle spotted them through the sliding glass door at the back of his house. He stepped outside to join them, smiling at his wife and dog. I see you met Beau. I'm totally in love with him. I've always wanted a dog. Elle stared at her like she was an alien creature. You've never had a dog? Never. And I've always loved them. She watched as Beau hurried over to greet Elle, subjecting him to the same uncontrolled licking she'd endured just an hour before. Are you finished with your calls? He nodded. Sorry about that. There was an emergency order, a regular retailer ran out, and he needs an express shipment. I'll have to go in for a couple of hours tomorrow afternoon to deal with it. We were going to move all my stuff tomorrow. She had most of it boxed and ready to go. Before the wedding, she'd had no idea if he wanted her to move in with him, but she'd known two people couldn't fit comfortably in her tiny apartment, so she'd been ready to move before the wedding. It all would have gone into storage if he'd been planning to move in with her. Thankfully, he hadn't been. He ran his fingers through his hair. We can still do that. You start back to school on Thursday, right? His mind was spinning trying to make everything work. He needed to hire another manager, badly. She nodded. I made sure all prep work was done before the wedding, so there's no worry there. Okay, I need to go into work from 2 to 4. We'll rent a truck in the morning and head over there, get as much done as we can, and get it over here and unloaded. You can put stuff away while I work, and then we'll go out for dinner. If we don't get it all done tomorrow, I'll call in some favors for Saturday. He stepped close to her, wrapping his arms around her. I'm sorry I have to work, but there's really no choice. She nodded. I do understand. She did her best to hide her disappointment. Do you want me to cook tonight? He shook his head. We'll go out and then do the grocery shopping. I'll shut my phone off and work can do without me for one more day. Erin smiled. I'd actually really appreciate that, if you don't mind. Of course not. We're still on our honeymoon until we start moving you tomorrow morning. I'd call that honeymoon too, but that's too much work to be honeymoon. She nodded. You're right. Way too much work. She sighed, resting her cheek on his shoulder. I'm not ready for the real world yet. His phone rang, and she sighed, taking a step back, but he put his hand on her arm and shut his phone off without even looking to see who it was. They'll survive without me for a few more hours. I promise. He caught her hand in his. Let's go eat. Steak? It's Tuesday, she answered, shocked he'd even suggest steak. Tacos it is. As they walked toward the front door, Erin sighed. At one point, I thought I'd never be able to eat another taco, but they're too delicious to resist. What do you mean? Why would any red-blooded American ever stop eating tacos? She shook her head. Didn't I tell you how Randall died? I assumed in a car crash. You said he was on his way to the wedding. She nodded, pulling her coat on. As much as she'd enjoyed Switzerland, a break from frigid weather would have been nice. He stopped at a Chinese place. He had this thing about fortune cookies. He always claimed that fortune cookies weren't really Chinese, but he ate them like a crazy person. They were his favorite thing. So he ate his fortune cookie as he walked back to his car, and he choked on it. Al blinked at her, trying hard to understand. He died choking on a fortune cookie? So why did you think about not eating tacos? Did it put you off all ethnic food? Oh, that's not it at all. After he started choking, he lost his balance and fell into the street. A Tim's taco truck ended him. Erin wasn't sure why she was telling him all this. She never told the full story. If you knew Randall, you'd understand why that would bother him so much. He'd call it an ignominious way to die. Al shook his head. I sure wouldn't want to go that way. Erin nodded. I usually just tell people what I told you. That he died on his way to the wedding. I don't go into all the details, because I know it would embarrass him. So if I die in a stupid way, you'll cover for me too, right? Because I'm your husband, and he was just your fiancé? She shook her head at him. Are you making light of the death of the man I loved? He noted she'd make that statement past tense, and he felt relief flood him. He couldn't compete with a dead memory. I'm sorry. I'll be more respectful in future. See that you are. Asterisk. When Erin returned to school on Thursday, all of her students had already heard she'd married. They'd all been assigned to perform a poem for class, and they were only 3 poems into the first class when she realized they'd coordinated with each other. Every single poem was about love or marriage. After the class, she went to the copy room to make copies for her advanced students. They would all be performing the same poem the following week, but it would be done with as little accent as possible. Part of teaching them to speak was teaching them to speak with a standard American accent. There was one student in particular who sounded as if she'd just fallen off the turnip truck. So what's the new married name? Her friend Angela asked from behind her. I didn't catch it at the wedding. It's Frank. Wait, I thought his first name was Frank. Frank's Fudge. Nope. He's Al Frank. I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to take his last name. Krol is my professional name after all. Angela shrugged. What's he like? Are you falling madly in love? Erin smiled. I'm falling slowly in love, if that makes sense. He's a good man, and he's kind and loving to me. There wasn't a lightning bolt or anything, but I'm definitely falling for the man. He smells like milk chocolate 90% of the time. How could I not fall for him? More like a slow fall down a hill than a rapid fall off a cliff. I'm rolling instead of leaping. Angela shook her head. Only you, Erin, she seemed thoughtful for a moment. So do you get a discount on fudge? Erin laughed. I have a feeling I'm going to have a lot of new friends in the future. Just so you remember who your friends were before you married your chocolate man. I call him my candy man. I'm not sure if he likes it, but I do, and that's what really matters. Erin picked up the copies she'd made and stacked them neatly. Time for the annual reading of the same poem by everyone. Angela groaned. My honors kids all complain about that assignment. They hate it. I know. It's boring for me too, but I can zero in on their deficits so much easier this way. Angela sighed. Whatever. Okay, off period is almost over. Lunch? Erin nodded. Come to my classroom today. We can really talk there. Oh. Am I getting good details? Erin knew her friend was asking about the sexual aspect of the honeymoon, and that was no one's business. Absolutely not. I just don't want to feel like a bug in a glass. So many people are watching me to see if I can make this work, because they think I'm an idiot for marrying a stranger. I can see that, Angela said with a shrug. Okay, I'll meet you in your classroom. Erin watched her go, glad she had someone to talk to in person. Jean was great, but even with Skype, it just wasn't the same. She needed to schedule a visit to see Megan. Some sister time was definitely in order, and one of Bob's Burgers. Asterisk. On her way home from school that evening, Jean called. Erin answered using the Bluetooth on her car. Hello. You're alive. How was the honeymoon? Jean asked. It was good. Switzerland is beautiful. We toured a bunch of chocolate factories, and I sampled all kinds of Swiss chocolates. Sounds like your dream trip. What do we think of Al? Erin smiled at Jean's wording. It was good to know your friends would take your side in anything. We think he's a great guy and a genuinely good person. I think Dr. Lachele did good. Yay. Because she's working on my match now. So you went ahead and did it? Are you nervous? Jean sighed audibly. You know, I'm not. Yet. Tax season is so hectic that I don't feel like I have time to be nervous. Erin laughed. You'll find time. You always do. This is true. I hope she finds someone good for me. As I was going through her forever-long interview process, I was sure I was going to be the first person she ever found unmatchable. There's just something fundamentally unlovable about me, right? You know better. People meet you and instantly love you. You're just being paranoid, because it's so freaky to ask someone to find you a man to spend the rest of your life with. In other cultures, it's the norm, but in ours, people have been marrying for love for a couple of 100 years. Marrying for any other reason feels foreign. Because it is. I hope I can go through with it after she matches me. You're going to be here for the wedding, right? You did promise. And I always keep my promises. You let me know when, and I'll catch a plane to Atlanta. I might even bring Al. If he's not working, that is. Erin tried to keep the frustration from her voice. Trouble in paradise already? Jean asked. What happened? Erin sighed. Well, the honeymoon was a tax write-off, because of all the chocolate factories we toured. We got home, and he immediately closeted himself in his office for a couple of hours, because of a business matter. Yesterday he went into work while we were supposed to be moving. He said 2 hours, but it was more like 4. I love what he does for a living. His fudge is absolutely amazing. But will I always come in second place? I hope not. You deserve to be first. Erin frowned. She wanted to be first, at least sometimes. When she walked in the door, it was to a silent house. She started dinner. He'd made breakfast, because she had to be at work 30 minutes earlier than he did. It wouldn't kill her to fix supper. She hoped. Chapter 8. Al was exhausted as he drove home from work. He had already decided to try to hire another manager. It wasn't fair to his new wife to always come after work in his life. If he had 2 managers, as well as working there himself, he would be able to spend more time with Erin and less time worrying about his fudge. When he walked in the door, he was surprised to find her in the kitchen, supper almost ready. After spending a minute greeting his overly enthusiastic dog, he walked to her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Thank you for cooking. Erin felt all her frustration with him melt away. He wasn't deliberately avoiding her so he could work. He has a business to run, and it was important to him, and to their financial future. I get home before you. It makes sense that I cook supper. Hopefully not every night, because you work too, but I'm happy to always fix breakfast. I can even put leftovers in a bowl for you to take for work on school days. She stopped stirring the pot of soup she'd made, and turned to him, wrapping her arms around him. How was your day? Did you bring me chocolate? She proceeded to pat him down, but found nothing. No chocolate? He leaned down and kissed her softly. I didn't forget your sweet tooth. I left the chocolate on the front seat of my car. How could I forget my little chocolate empress? Oh good. While I put supper on the table, you go and fetch that for me. Do you want water or something else to drink? Water's fine, he said, already halfway to the door. I usually like iced tea with supper. I will remember that. And figure out how to make it. Her family had usually had water or milk with meals, so she had never learned. She had everything on the table when he got back in. He put the package he'd brought on the counter, and she walked over to get it. Stop. You need to eat supper first. Al swatted her hand away playfully. The best part about being a grown-up is eating dessert first. He couldn't seriously mean to keep her from her chocolate, could he? Eat. Erin frowned, moving to the table. She'd made a beef soup with vegetables and barley. She didn't know why she loved soup so much, but it just felt like the perfect food to her. We need to get some frozen bread dough, she said as soon as she was seated. I would have loved to have made bread with the soup. Or Pillsbury crescents. I could have made those. He shook his head at her. My wife, the gourmet cook. I'm better than my sister. She thinks putting together a tuna salad is the ultimate in culinary feats. I guess it's a good thing she married a chef then. And I married a famous fudge maker. Maybe we should hire a cook. He laughed. I'm not exactly famous. Maybe in Laramie, but not outside it. He tried a bite of her soup. Pretty good soup. I am a soup lover. I could eat it every night. Well, other than Tuesdays, of course. Erin took a big bite of her soup and smiled. If you like stuff other than soup, you might need to mention that now. She felt Bo nudge her under the table with his nose, and she reached down to pat him. Al shrugged. When I need something other than soup, I'll make sure to cook myself. I have the ability to do so. That's a good thing, given who you married. After they'd eaten, Erin went straight to her chocolate he'd brought her. I thought my mint fudge might be a nice treat. Al had never seen anyone who ate chocolate quite the way Erin did. She had gone through all the chocolate she'd bought when they first arrived in Switzerland and all the chocolate the different factories had offered. Erin unwrapped it, bringing it to her nose and inhaling deeply. I love the smell of chocolate, which is probably why I love how you smell so much. It's like you bathe in it while you're gone all day. Do you sit in huge vats of chocolate at work? And if so, may I join you? Al leaned onto the counter to watch her eat. I don't. The chocolate would scald my skin. Maybe I should find a way to make it liquid at a lower temperature so you could bathe in it. It would ensure my never-ending love. Erin bit into the fudge, moaning softly. This is heavenly. You are very easy to please, my dear wife. She shook her head at him, raising a finger to her lips. I'm eating chocolate here. It's almost a religious experience when it's your chocolate. He shook his head at her, not able to help the grin that played at his lips. There was something awfully special about having your life's work so blatantly appreciated. He picked up his bowl and spoon, clearing the table. The faster the work was out of the way, the faster they could get to the good part of their evening. Asterisk. Friday evening, Erin got a call from Megan, inviting her and Al to come to Culpeper on Sunday. I want to get to know your husband better, and he's got to taste one of Bob's burgers. The two of them have to be able to find a way to help each other in their business. Hang on, and let me ask him. Al was closeted away in his office, doing some paperwork, so Erin went to his office and knocked softly on the door. Yeah. Al looked up, his mind still on the numbers from the previous month. Christmas sales had not only exceeded his expectations, they'd exceeded them by 50%. He was going to have to figure out how to expand quickly if he was going to be able to keep up with demand. Megan wants us to come to Culpeper and spend Sunday with her and Bob. You're going to be off Sunday, right? Al looked at her blankly for a moment. Yeah, sure. We can do that. What time do you want to leave? He knew it was the small town where her sister lived, but he had no idea where it was, other than it was somewhere in Wyoming. If we leave at 10, we'll be there in plenty of time for lunch. Bob's burgers are absolutely amazing. Then we'll need to leave by 10, won't we? Erin smiled at him, before closing the door and putting the phone back to her ear. We'll be there before lunch. We do expect to have some of Bob's burgers. Of course you will. It's not like I'm going to cook for you. I would never ask you to. Bo deposited a toy at Erin's feet, and she held it for a moment, waiting until he was sitting. Okay, I'll see you Sunday. Bring some fudge, would you? Erin laughed. Now I know the real reason my sister wants to see me. She wants chocolate. She threw the toy across the room, and Bo happily loped after it. Bring a lot. I can freeze some and never run out. Erin shook her head. Any particular flavors in mind? Or should I just have an assortment? She picked up the slobbery toy and threw it again, smiling when the dog brought it right back. Flavor doesn't matter nearly as much as volume at the moment. Sometimes I think you're worse than I am about chocolate, Megan. I didn't think that was possible. Well, I am pregnant, so I have an excuse. Are you still going to be using that excuse well after the baby is born? You'll then be nursing, and then you'll be trying to recover from nursing. Megan laughed. You figured me out. Lots of chocolate? Erin grinned. I'll tell Al. He brings me a new flavor of fudge every day now. Stop bragging. I love my burger man, but sometimes, I envy you for having a candy man. You should. He's pretty darn awesome. After she'd hung up the phone, Erin wandered back into the spare bedroom of the 3-bedroom house, Bo trailing behind her. She was keeping her books in there, well, the ones she hadn't gotten on her Kindle. She'd done a major purge just the month before, trying to make it easier to consolidate households. It was hard parting with some of her favorite books, but there were just too many. It was strange to think that she'd only known Al for 2 weeks. Very, very strange. Her phone rang, and she tugged it from her pocket, smiling when she saw the name on the display. Hey, Dr. Lachele. It's your favorite crazy woman calling to make sure your marriage hasn't fallen apart. How's everything going, chica? It's good. The first few days were awkward, but I think we've found our stride. Erin paused for a moment. Or we had before we came home from Switzerland. Okay, tell Dr. Lachele everything. What's bugging you? The older woman's voice was soothing, and it was obvious she was in counseling mode. Did you know he took me to Switzerland for the honeymoon so we could tour chocolate factories, and he could take it as a tax write-off? Dr. Lachele laughed. That sounds like Al. Erin sighed. I haven't figured out yet if I should be offended or not. And as soon as we got back, he was working. Like within minutes. It was nuts. She sat down on the bed in the room, wrapping her arm around one knee and curling the other leg around her foot. Bo curled up beside her, and she realized the dog missed Al as much as she did. I barely see him. He comes home, we eat dinner, and he goes into his office to work. Mealtimes and bed are all I get from him. At least you're getting bed. Tell him to cover you in fudge sauce and, Dr. Lachele laughed. Oops, did I say that out loud? Sorry. Erin shook her head. You are not. You said it on purpose to make me blush, and you know it. Did you blush? Nope. I expect that nonsense from you, so I refuse to blush. Well, that takes all the fun out of it for me. Dr. Lachele laughed for a moment, but then her voice turned serious. Al's a really good man, and he's the right one for you. Give him some time to get over his obsession with work, and I think you'll have a good marriage. I sure hope so. I'm developing feelings for him already, but he's always so busy, I feel like he doesn't even notice me. I was watching his face at your reception, snickerdoodle. Trust me. He notices you in every way a man should notice his wife. That made Erin smile. I hope so. Didn't I just finish telling you to trust me? Erin laughed. You're awfully bossy, you know. I know. It's one of my most endearing qualities. Erin shook her head when she realized the phone had gone dead. Dr. Lachele wasn't much for goodbyes. She tucked the phone back into her pocket and got back to work. She was turning the spare room into an office where she could work. Planning her lessons and grading tests needed to be done somewhere, and this was the perfect place. She glanced over at Beau. At least she had him to keep her company. Asterisk. Erin had lunch with her parents on Saturday, because she knew her mother needed to see her. She didn't have a ton of time, because she wanted all of her things put away before she went to bed that night. Not having to worry about them while she was with her sister Sunday would allow her to have a much better visit. "Do you regret marrying him?" Mom asked, studying her carefully. They were at her favorite barbecue place near the high school. Erin often ate there with Angela. "Not at all. He's a good man." Erin took a sip of her drink. "How many times have you used your fudge discount?" There was no doubt in her mind her mother had gone to Frank's Fudge several times while she was in Switzerland. Mom grinned, taking a bite of her turkey. "Well, I didn't say I was disappointed you married him, did I?" Dad shook his head. "You're both more than a little crazy about his fudge. I've tried it, and it's no different than any other fudge I've tasted." Erin's eyes grew wide. "With an attitude like that, you never get to have Frank's fudge again. What is your problem?" Cleary AL's fudge was superior to all other brands. Why couldn't he taste the difference? Mom sighed. "I didn't realize when I married him that his taste buds were broken. I'm just glad you inherited your sense of taste from me and not from him." "Me too." Erin forked up another bite of her potato salad. "AL's a good man. He rented this pretty little chalet with a beautiful view of the mountains in Switzerland, and we had a nice time." She pointed to her earrings. "And he got me chocolate diamonds for Christmas." What kind of man thinks to get his new wife chocolate diamonds? "A fudge maker, obviously," Mom said with a grin. "I'm glad he's a good man. I was really worried about you marrying a stranger and immediately leaving the country with him. I was sure you'd lost your mind. Especially after I met Dr. Lachele. That woman seems like she's a little bit on the tipsy side, all the time." Erin grinned. "She's a character, that's for sure. I really like her. She called last night to see how we're doing, and she gave me some good advice. I like that she's following up with me." Dad nodded. "I ran a background check on him while you were gone. No felonies." Erin stared at him in shock. "How'd you do that?" "Friend on the police force. He understood that I needed to know what my baby had gotten herself into." "Did you do a background check on Bob?" she asked indignantly. Megan had only known him for a couple of months when they got married. "Of course, I did. Who do you think you're talking to? I treat my girls equally. I wouldn't do a background check on one of your new husbands and not the other. Wouldn't be right." Erin snorted, somewhat appeased. Megan was actually her half-sister. Mom's first husband had died when she was barely pregnant. Dad had always treated them exactly the same though. No favoritism for his only biological daughter. "Does Bob have any felonies?" "Nope." "Do you really think I wouldn't have dragged Megan home to live with us by now if he did?" Dad shook his head at her. "You know me better than that." She shook her head. "I think we're both big girls and old enough to take care of ourselves, Dad." "Maybe. That doesn't mean I'm not going to try to keep you on the straight and narrow. We'd worry there was something wrong if you didn't." Chapter 9. Al got a call just before they were supposed to leave for Culpeper the next morning. "It's work. I have to take it." There was apology in his eyes, but that didn't make Erin feel any better about it. She sighed, going to get a bottle of water from the fridge and curling up on the couch with her Kindle, noting that Beau sat beside her, leaning against her. She'd never been one to waste time, and she wasn't nearly caught up with all the books Jolene Gold had written. The woman seemed to crank out books faster than babies cranked out dirty diapers. 5 minutes later, Al joined her. Sorry about that. I'm not taking any more work calls today. I'm all yours. Erin nodded, hating that she was jealous of his work, but she didn't know how to stop it. Sounds good. Are you in the mood for Bob's Burgers? Always. She stood up. I'm glad we're having a day with no work. It's time. Bo looked at her with sad eyes, obviously knowing they were leaving. He hated to be home alone all day. She wished they could take him, but then he'd just be cooped up in the car while they had lunch. He sighed. I know it is. That business has been my everything since Misty moved out. I guess I need to remember that there's a special woman in my life now. Or you could just keep ignoring me. I'm getting used to that. I don't ignore you. He shook his head. I'm trying to get things sorted out so I can spend less time worrying about work and more time with you. That would be wonderful. Erin started to say more, but she stopped herself. She couldn't take out her frustration on him. He wasn't really doing anything wrong. We need to go. I wanted to be out of here 10 minutes ago. Let's go then. Am I driving? If you wouldn't mind. You'll have to give me directions, but I don't mind driving. He preferred it, but he didn't say so. He didn't want her to take it wrong. He'd dated a girl once, and she had assumed he didn't trust women drivers, but truthfully, he just preferred to always be the driver. He wasn't about to go down that road with his new wife. He wasn't a stupid man. Do you want me to grab you a bottle of water for the road? That'd be nice. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to him, kissing her. I am sorry about all the business calls. I didn't realize how many I got until we got married. It's good to be aware of these things. Erin bit her lip against what she wanted to say. She'd never considered herself a jealous woman, but she was very jealous of all the time he spent working. When they reached Culpeper, they picked Megan and Bob up and drove to the restaurant. Carrie, Bob's manager, greeted them. Hey there, Megan. How are you feeling? Megan patted her stomach with a grin. My little future burger eater is content as can be. Glad to hear it. No morning sickness? Nah. I had some at first, but I'm fine now. Bob had a talk with him. Carrie laughed. And this is your sister, Erica? Erin, Megan told her. But close. Good to see you again, Erin. Carrie led them to a booth off to one side. I'll get some fried cheese curds for the table. Drinks? Megan grinned at her sister after Carrie had walked away. The best thing about being married to the owner of the place is everyone bends over backward to make me happy. Erin nodded. That would be a plus. She handed the bag with Frank's fudge emblazoned on the side to her sister. I haven't checked out what he brought, but Al made you a box. Megan immediately opened the bag and pulled out a large box. This should last at least a week. Thank you, Al. She opened it and looked at the pieces inside. This is amazing. There must be 8 different flavors here. 12, Al responded. And if you pick up a piece, I labeled what kind it is under each one. He'd gone to extra trouble for her, but she was Erin's sister. Megan looked at her sister with a grin. You should have married him years ago. Bob rolled his eyes. She used to love only me, because of my burgers. Now I think she's half in love with her own brother-in-law, because of his chocolate. Have you noticed yet the women in this family are obsessed with food? Al smiled at Erin. I've noticed my wife is obsessed with chocolate, and I heartily approve. He squeezed Erin's hand under the table. It's what gives her skin that healthy glow. Bob looked at Megan. You told me it was pregnancy. Megan laughed. The pregnancy cravings cause more chocolate consumption. They're linked. Once they'd finished eating, Bob took Elle back to show him the kitchen and talk a little business. Do you think they'll talk about anything other than chocolate and burgers back there? Erin asked Megan. Megan shook her head. When Bob starts talking business, there's no stopping him. What about Al? Same. I swear, I think he forgets that I exist when a business call comes in. Megan nodded. It used to annoy me about Bob, but I realized I'm the same with my business calls. I'll get a call from someone wanting to see a house, and nothing exists until I finish that phone call. I'm not like that, but maybe it's because I'm a teacher? It's not like my students call me. Maybe. Does it really bother you that much? Erin sighed. I didn't think it would, but it does. I feel like he's choosing his work over me, and I want to come first. I think you do. Has he taken any calls today? Yeah. He got one just before we left, and he promised he wouldn't take any more today. Erin shook her head. He even works Saturdays. We only have one day a week together. Does he have a choice about working Saturdays? I don't know. We've never really discussed it. Maybe you should. There may be a perfectly good reason he needs to work on Saturdays. I'm sure he's not doing it to avoid you or anything. Erin frowned at her sister. It never occurred to me he was avoiding me until you mentioned it. Thanks, Megan. Now it would play in her mind over and over. Dang it. Megan shook her head with a laugh. You know that's not what I think. Erin sighed. I need to just get over it. He runs a business. I guess I just keep comparing him to Dad. Dad has always run a business, but he made sure he had time for his family too. Is it too much to ask that I'll do the same? Dad's business was established for a few years before he met Mom. We don't know what it was like in the early days, do we? I guess not. I'm just grumpy. It's no fun being a newlywed all by myself. Have you talked to that crazy purple-haired doctor woman about it? Megan asked. Maybe she has some insight. Actually, I talked to her on Friday night. She didn't really have any insight, but she told me to stick with him, and it'll get better. Is Jean really going to do the same thing you did? Meet a man at the altar? Erin smiled, nodding. She is. Jean's so serious and straight-laced. It's hard to believe she'll really go through with it, but she made me promise to be there for her wedding. If Al doesn't want to go, you'll have to take me as your date. Why? Erin asked, frowning. Because I want to see how nervous she gets. I mean, you seemed nervous, but I think Jean will be crawling up the walls, she'll be so freaked out. Chapter 10. Al was excited and nervous all at once as he pulled into the driveway that evening. He'd decided that Valentine's was the perfect day for his huge declaration of love to Erin. He'd spent the past few weeks preparing for this special night. He'd forgotten to tell her not to cook, but he could take her out the next night if she already had. He'd have a lot more free time on his hands now. He was positively gleeful as he opened the front door, calling out to her. Erin, I'm home. She came out of the kitchen, and he noticed for the first time a look of utter and complete sadness on her face. She'd always seemed so happy to him, and he was startled. Hi. Are you okay? He set the box of chocolates he'd brought her on the counter and pulled her to him. Did something happen? She pulled away from him with a frown. No, nothing happened. I just made some decisions today. We should talk. He nodded. We can talk. He picked up the chocolates from the counter. But first, Happy Valentine's Day. She looked down at the chocolates in her hands, and for once didn't want to dive into them. Thank you. She set them on the counter beside her. He frowned at the box. You have to open them. She closed her eyes for a moment, wanting to tell him that chocolates didn't matter if he didn't love her. She'd be willing to give up her love of chocolate for him. Instead, she picked up the box and opened it. On top of the chocolates was a heart-shaped note. My dearest wife, I've spent the past few weeks working hard to make some changes in my life. I've hired a new manager who will take all my Saturday shifts and allow me to be home at a decent hour. More importantly, I created the perfect chocolate for my wonderful, beautiful wife. I'm calling it simply, the Erin. I love you more than I could ever express. She felt tears prick her eyes as she took one of the chocolates and popped it into her mouth. She leaned against the counter, moaning with the pleasure of the flavors popping on her tongue. It was a hard caramel, covered with milk chocolate, with a dash of sea salt on top. She chewed it slowly, savoring every bite. It was absolutely perfect. As soon as she finished it, she set the box on the counter and threw her arms around him. I love you so much. He laughed softly, his arms closing around her. I love you too. I've known for weeks, but I didn't give you a perfect marriage proposal, or really any proposal at all, so I thought you deserved the perfect declaration of love. She sniffed back a tear as she buried her face in his shoulder. I was going to offer you your freedom tonight. She didn't bother to mention that she'd planned to fight him for custody of the dog. He knew her, so he'd already know that. Freedom? What are you talking about? I thought you wanted me to leave. You're never here anymore. You've been going into work before I get up, and not getting home until it's time for bed. Al sighed. I had a new manager to train, and as soon as she was trained to my satisfaction, I had to work at creating your chocolate. I knew you wanted one with caramel and sea salt, because of your conversation in the candy shop at the airport. And I wanted it to be just right. I guess I should have told you what I was doing instead of working so hard to keep it a surprise. Or maybe I should have asked you what was going on instead of assuming that you didn't want to be around me. Erin sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. I'm sorry, I thought the worst of you. I never would have let you think that. I love you too much to put you through that kind of pain. If I'd had any idea, I'd have told you what I was doing. Why did you always work Saturdays? You could choose your days off, and I never understood that. Saturdays have always been our busiest day, and the only day that we needed two managers on duty. I always felt like I had to be there. Now that Tabitha knows what she's doing, I won't worry about it though. Tabitha? Is your new manager a cute little blonde who would make me want to vomit with her perkiness? Erin looked up at him, wondering if she needed to go have a talk with said perky blonde. Al laughed. Don't get jealous now. She's actually Misty's mother-in-law. Now that Misty is working overnights, she's home with the girls all day, and her former babysitter is free to work for me during the day. She's wonderful with the customers, but I had to teach her a lot about fudge making. And she's doing well now? He shrugged. Let's just say that I have told her to let the employees handle the fudge making, and she can handle the customers. And how do you feel about that? I need to be okay with it. I have a well-trained staff, and I need to spend more time with my new wife. She smiled, stepping closer to him. I made supper. Whatever it is, it smells good. His hand stroked over her back. I was hoping I could take you out tonight, but I should have communicated that to you. I'm sorry I made you feel like I was trying to stay away from you. She looped her arms around his neck, the twinkle back in her eyes. I'll forgive you, this time. Don't let it happen again. He laughed. I'll do my very best. He raised an eyebrow. Will supper spoil if it sits for another hour? No, but I might get hangry. He groaned. I guess we can save the hanky-panky until after supper. And after chocolate. She leaned close, her lips on his ear. You know your chocolate always puts me in the mood. What did I do before you came into my life, Erin Krol? He cupped her face in his hands, looking deeply into her eyes. Erin Frank. I'm going to officially change my name. Now that she knew he loved her back, it seemed the only thing to do. Really? She nodded. I love you. I want our children to carry your name, and I want to have it too. Children? Are you? Not that I know of. Hopefully soon. I guess we should let your sister enjoy her pregnancy before we try to steal her thunder. Erin shook her head. Not at all. We've talked about it. We'd love to have babies that were close in age. Your first best friends should be your siblings or your cousin. Well, then we'll just have to try harder. Even if it doesn't work right away, it'll be a win-win. She laughed. I guess it will. Epilogue. Erin looked down at the display on her phone as it rang, answering immediately. Hey you. Jean's voice sounded both nervous and excited. Dr. Lachele found me a match. Wedding is first Saturday in April. Really? That's only a couple of weeks. Are you excited? Very. You're still coming, right? Of course I am. And if Al doesn't come with me, I'll bring Megan as my date. She asked to come because she wants to see you go absolutely insane as you try to figure out how to get out of it. Tell your sister she's not my favorite friend anymore. Erin laughed. She never was. It was always me. Yeah, it was always you. I can't deny it. Jean sighed. Tell me it's all going to be okay, and he won't kill me in my sleep. It's going to be wonderful. You are going to marry the man who will make all your dreams come true. Erin smiled as she patted her belly. Like Al made mine come true. He made all your dreams come true? Jean asked. After a moment, she squealed. You're pregnant. Erin laughed softly. I am. I just found out yesterday. Al is walking on air. He's determined it's a girl. I keep telling him if it is, I'm naming her Sally and calling her Sal. I won't really, but it gets his goat. Jean laughed. You should be nicer to him. Who's going to get you pickle-flavored ice cream in the middle of the night if you make him mad? Oh, you know he'll do anything for me. Want me to bring you some Frank's fudge when I come down for the wedding? You know I do. I want some plain fudge, some peanut butter fudge, and make sure you bring me the Erin. Erin felt a thrill run through her as she thought about the special chocolate Al had named after her. It was his bestseller. I will bring some of each. I can't wait to see you. In her mind, she was already thinking about which substitute she wanted to cover for her at work. I'll fly down after work on Thursday. We should do a spa day Friday. Sounds good. I'll be less nervous if I have you there to hold my hand. Are you sure you should get married at the beginning of April? Isn't that still tax season? I won't be able to take any time off, but I'll make it work. I always do. Jean sounded hesitant. I hope you don't get into fights over that. At least it'll only be a couple of weeks before your workload lightens up. Yeah. And then I'll live happily ever after, just like you and Al and baby Sal. Erin giggled. Oh, I wish he'd heard you say that. Jean laughed. You really should stop tormenting the poor man. Probably. But will I? No way. Erin put her feet up on the coffee table in front of her. Meeting her husband at the altar was the smartest thing she'd ever done, and she knew Jean was making the right decision too.